This school year, I had to undergo the exact same process as all the other 4 million high school seniors around the United States. Apply to colleges and write a personal statement. Actually, 15 of them. I remember sitting in front of my computer and staring at the blank screen, asking myself, why? Why did I do all my projects? Why did I start this activity and the other activity? I was wondering what it means to be interested in something and where the interest comes from. This is a picture of a 2-year-old me full of interest. I remember the feeling when I touched the piano keys for the first time. Fascination and curiosity. I kept pressing all the keys one after the other and couldn't stop. Firstly, unconsciously. As a child, just for the sake of making sound. Later, with more and more questions as the years passed. How can all those random keys produce insane combinations of sounds? How do people read notes? How do they come up with new music and share it with others? With all those questions in my head, I opened the doors of the Ukrainian music school for the first time when I was 5. In my home country, music school system is completely separate from the actual school. Music schools have their own structure, standardized curriculum, and a separate grading system. I dived into music theory, music composition, and piano playing classes with an open mind, waiting for my eureka moment to come. However, the more I studied, the less hope I had that my questions would actually be answered. The strict classical music curriculum didn't give much room for creativity. And the culture of striving for perfect tone and technique through memorization and hours of practice with no basic understanding of harmony made me feel like a machine. Competition, concert, another competition, another concert, new pieces, no connection between what I was playing and how the pieces were written. As I grew up, I noticed that more and more kids were leaving the music schools. I was not the only one losing the feeling of excitement. On average, 2/3 of the piano playing class graduates, and most of the students stop playing in the future. In my class of 50 students, for instance, only 3 are still connected to music somehow. I thought that I would see a difference in the statistics when I would face another music education system. When I came to the United States, I realized that kids can study music at school. A lot of them are engaged in musical activities like bands and orchestras. Those interested who have the opportunity can get private teachers. Also, there are a lot more options. You can study various styles instead of playing classical pieces all the time. However, this educational system has its weaknesses as well. The lack of structure brings kids to different levels at different ages. A lot of them never study music theory. They reach the level where they can play some pop tunes and stop developing their skills. Structure of some form, however, gives kids the opportunity to work with like-minded peers and study together. This environment provides the same basic knowledge to everyone and opens more opportunities, like self-organized concerts, ensemble performances, and other team projects which can be implemented more easily if all the kids are on the same page. Despite the differences in 2 educational systems I experienced, the outcome is still the same. Children tend to lose their interest over time. It is not about the level in which the child is engaged in music. The conclusion is not really about music as well. Throughout my experience in this field, I noticed how kids tend to lose their spark. The moment when they have a ton of questions in their head and the desire to spend hours and hours in front of the piano just for the sake to understand how music works. My first question was, why? Why do kids lose their interest when they start doing something they originally wanted to do? And my second question was, how? How can we modify the system in a way that will help children not lose their interest? I'm going to try to answer the first question using the analogy I came up with while doing gardening with my grandpa. Imagine growing a watermelon. Firstly, you have to dig 3 or 4 holes and put a bunch of seeds into each of them. In the same way, parents tend to introduce their children to different activities when they're still very young. However, planting the seed of interest is a relatively easy part. One seed will give you a plant. Child will eventually get interested in at least one of the activities they were introduced to. After that, however, comes the most complicated stage. For the plant to reach the level until it can develop independently and be able to produce a watermelon, you have to maintain certain conditions to help its growth. In the same way, the learning environment should support the children until they can see the first results of their work. After that, the first signs of success will keep their motivation going. It is very easy for the plant to die out on those first stages when it's still small and fragile, as it is for the child to lose their interest when they just start facing the first struggles with the technique. So here we come to the second question. Are there any methods that can help children not lose their interest on this complicated stage? I decided to find the answer through experimentation and create a book about piano improvisation for kids. To find the reasons why children tend to lose their interest, I decided to look back on my own experience and ask my peers to identify the key weaknesses of the music educational system. I'm going to go through a couple of them and talk about the methods I used in my book that represent an approach that differs from both systems that I experienced. When I just started asking students what they think was the most common reason for the kids to quit music school and stop playing, a lot of them mentioned classical music curriculum. The pieces of classical music usually contain very complicated harmonies, which are hard for kids to understand. This way, children never learn the actual structure of the piece. They cannot see why the composer wrote in a certain key or used a particular chord progression. When the child doesn't understand what they are playing, the learning process turns into pure memorization, like learning a poem or 100 periodic table elements. My solution was to introduce children to piano improvisation. There is a common belief that kids cannot improvise. However, I decided to challenge this view and instead give the structure to the basic music theory concepts and show their applications. This way, children can understand what they are playing from the early stages, starting from simple scales and moving forward to the construction of their own melodies and chord progressions. In addition to being a great introduction to piano improvisation, this method also gives kids a lot of room for creativity and shows them how everything they learned can be applied in their own music. Another answer that I received while asking why the kids tend to lose their interest in music at the early stages of learning was yucky music theory with pages of chord progressions that don't sound like Beatles at all, in the words of one of the kids. My solution was to not try to teach kids music theory, but to tell them a story instead. I developed a story about a note F and her family C major, which lives in Music City, to explain all the music theory concepts I used in my book. Storytelling is a great technique to keep kids engaged. It also gives the author the opportunity to use real-world examples and associations to make the explanations more clear and memorable. Step by step, you can go through the story and introduce children to the structure of minor and major scales using the analogy of even and odd numbers, or tell them about modulation, presenting the process as one key visiting the other key. The most important part for me, however, was to show the kids the connection between what they are playing and music theory. I personally struggled to learn how to read harmonies on my own when I was younger. The connection between theory and practice allows kids to answer the question why we're learning music theory and how it can be used. When the child can see the harmonies, they can avoid pure memorization and instead understand what they're playing. To make this idea real, I created exercises after each chapter of the book, where the characters are engaged in different types of activities that encourage the readers to use their pianos and apply the skills they just learned. The exercises themselves are parts of the story to not make children feel like they have to do some type of typical homework after each chapter. Those are just a few techniques I developed to bring something new into the world of music education. I genuinely believe that the question of how to keep child interested should be at the center of the development of every single educational system. Before being published, my book was read by certified professionals and kids of different ages who served as beta readers. My experiment proved to be successful as it included some innovative techniques which allow kids to see new opportunities in their music journey. And even if those techniques are not the best in terms of educational experience, my experiment still proves that working from the perspective of keeping the child interested can bring some positive changes into the future of education. Thank you.